So we've got quite a lineup of speakers today. So Sylvain has come from Bossa Studios, and he's going to be talking about some of the issues that they've. In fact, I've got descriptions here, so I don't have to make things up. So they're going to be talking about some of the issues they've had with Unity, and also looking at ship simulation. Awesome, didn't mess that one up. And then a little bit later, so we are running a little bit behind, but as I said a moment ago, we have factored in a lot of time for questions and for breaks. But then Mark and Audrey have come here from Sketchbook Games, so they're going to be giving us a look into their project of what their game Lost Worlds. Sorry about this, I'm just almost running out of steam already in my voice. Then we're going to be taking a break. So one thing which there is drinks machines down on the bottom floor, and there is a cafe which serves coffee over in the Queen Mary building. I'll give instructions on how to get to that once we get to the break. Unfortunately, we don't have any budget. As you know, the London Unity User Group is run by the community, so unless a sponsor steps in to be able to provide drinks. So today, unfortunately, we don't have drinks, but there are refreshments, and town is just not very far away. Then Martin has come from the Small Business Centre, so they're based in South East London.
Yeah, we are.
And the reason why, so this is a talk which isn't necessarily aimed at games, but for anyone who was at the last meetup where we had it at King, there was a talk from the BFI talking about tax breaks. And one of the things that came up through that is that you have to be a registered company to be able to take advantage of tax breaks for the UK games industry. And there's some slides which I will put up in the break so you can see some of the points that the BFI were talking about. And from that, a lot of people were saying, well, I'm an indie developer, I'm not a registered company, I'm a one-man band, or we're working in a small team. And at that point, the question came up, how do you set yourselves up as a company? So we looked into it, and just by coincidence, one of Martin's colleagues contacted us at the university about doing talks of this nature. So Martin's come along to be able to give us some insight on how you can actually go about setting yourselves up. So whilst it's not games orientated, I think especially for the industry and for a lot of guys and girls who are here today, this is something which hopefully will be able to allow yourself to set up to take advantages of all of the things that business or being a company can allow you to do. Then Wistish. So Julian is going to be doing a talk on locomotion in VR, and the what do you refer to that as?
Prototype is the Rover one.
The Rover one. So, and I think during the breaks, we're going to have, or you'll have the opportunity to be able to have a go on this. So, at the Develop conference, I was moving my legs around, chasing or being chased by ghosts in a kind of Pac-Man VR. So, if that's the version you've got set up, so have a go on that in the break. So that will be followed by another break. Then Ryan Flynn, who isn't quite here yet, is going to be doing a talk on using Unity and combining it with Sonic Pi and OSC, which stands for something about sound communication. Anyone want to correct me on that? Open sound communication. Good. Awesome. Okay, I've now managed to learn something. And then the guys from Skill Search, Giles and Guy, are going to be coming to do a talk, basically to take you through what industry is looking for. So there's been a lot of changes. As we all know, VR has become this quite a sort of strong thing. Environment artists, especially because of VR, is becoming a more sought after skill set. So those guys are going to be coming to talk to us about what people are actually looking for. So if anybody is looking for work, these are great guys to talk to. Quite often I'm a little bit dubious about kind of recruiters and their motivations for being involved and kind of talking to people. But guys, I really am running out of steam. Giles and Guy, we've known for about 5 years now, and they've never asked for anything in return. They've come along to events like this. They've helped us at the university. So the most trustworthy recruiters I've ever known, and they'll be good contacts for anyone who's looking for work to make. Then we're going to have open mic. I have been contacted by somebody whose name I've now forgotten, but he's involved in the game BBF or Die. So if anyone's seen that being promoted, it's being made in Unity, and they're going to be one of the people doing an open mic slot. If anybody wants to show anything on open mic, if it's just showing your game, if it's looking for people to work with, if it's looking for employers, anything along those lines. This is a community. I have no say over what gets talked about or doesn't get talked about. So if there's something that you want to kind of show, we're going to have the time to do it before we go to the pub and network. So that's pretty much the lineup for today. Luckily now I am going to stop speaking because I don't think I can do that anymore. So I'm going to hand over to Sylvain now, who, there was one last thing, which, to be honest, is very boring. Fire exits. Green sign, follow green signs, the man running, fire exits. And go outside. That's the main part. I think that covers all of those things. Awesome. So if we could give a warm welcome to Sylvain.
Where's the microphone?
It's the two things sticking up there. So.
Okay, so I'll try to stand here. Hello, everybody. Before we get started, so I'll introduce myself. I'm Sylvain Cornillon. I'm the CTO at Bossa Studios. And no, we're not hiring. We are hiring, but that's too early. That's the last one. Let's go back to the beginning. Sorry about this, as you can see my notes. That's the only notes I have, because I copied that from another presentation. There you go. I'm Sylvain, I'm the CTO. That's my Twitter account. So I have no clue how long this presentation runs, so we're going to try to make it fit in the time we have. I found a nice title for it. It's Running a Tight Ship. It's about the airship simulation in Worlds Adrift. So, what's Worlds Adrift? So, I don't know what you know about Bossa Studios, so I'm going to cover a bit. We've released in the past few years, we've released games like Surgeon Simulator, and I Am Bread, and a bunch of other little games. Surgeon Simulator and I Am Bread are both on Unity, and they were based on, awkward control schemes and physics in one location. And so in the continuation of that physics-based gameplay, we wanted to go into multiplayer, and we started an idea of, in a game jam, of a physics-based sandbox MMO. So it's not an RPG, it's not an MMORPG with quests and this kind of stuff, but it is physics-based. And player craft airships, so they gather resources in a physical way by cutting woods and grabbing stuff, and then with their crew and their friends, they craft airships that they can customize to no end, and then they explore a huge world that is made of floating islands, and though you go from floating islands to floating islands with those airships. And then you gather knowledge about the civilization that are long lost before the island, before the world shattered into those islands. From a technical point of view, this is a game that we're developing in partnership with Improbable.io, which is developing Spatial OS. It's a technology to do the server side of things, and it also uses Unity. Not only Unity, but we use Unity as Bossa Studio is, as it stands right now, Unity. A Unity house. Okay, so let's try to play the video so you have an idea of what the game looks like. Okay, so I don't know if you've seen all that. That's made by a team of, we got support from Improbable that does a lot of the server technology, but the game itself, everything you see on screen, was, from a developer point of view, was developed by five coders. I mean, at the beginning it was even less, with 3. As you saw, all the islands were player generated. So there's a bunch of quite unique features in the game. One of the first one, and that's really possible because of Improbable, it's a huge world. So our next alpha we're going to run a world that's 25 kilometers by 25 kilometers, with the character being 2 meters tall. It's physical, so the ships that you've seen are being moved by forces in Unity. It's rigid bodies, and they have, gravity and even a physical core that pushes it back up if we don't even deactivate gravity. The world is continuous, so the 25 by 25 kilometers are continuous. So that obviously generates a few problems. That's not the subject of the talk today, but that in itself is an interesting problem, trying to make a world of that size in Unity. As I said, the airships are freeform, and they're created by the players. The ships you've seen are not freeform yet. They're based on a template hull, but in the future version, we have that working now. I'm demonstrating that now. We have a hull that's actually being built by the players, and with different sizes, and so the ship is entirely freeform. The islands are user generated, and they are going to be part of the main world. The world is persistent. We have weather simulation for the wind and the clouds. We've got simulated critters with ecosystem. They mate, they live, they die. There's a lot of interesting talk to do just about the creatures. And as you can see, you've seen the grappling hook, which is a physical rope. Basically, when you grapple something, you're applying forces to whatever you're grappling on, and it wraps around the object and stuff like that. So that's when we put it like this, that's quite an impressive feature set of unique stuff for a small team, independent. A lot of it is obviously thanks to being able to use Unity and Spatial OS. So the challenge for today, out of all those challenges, the challenge we're going to talk about today, I'm going to try to go into more detail, is in a massively multiplayer physics-based game, when you get a player platform, so a platform like the ship, being driven by a player, and then you have other player on it moving freely, and that's all free. And obviously you want that to be responsive, you want that to be consistent, you don't want that to be jerky and all that. So how do you do that? So first thing, why it's hard, why it's a hard problem, why it's worth talking about it today. We don't have any control over the player movements. So I don't know, I can't say, oh, you're now in the ship, so now your world is a ship, everything is relative to the ship. And then you get out through a door and then teleport, which some games do, you either on the ship or not on the ship. Here you've seen the guy, on the deck, they're walking. The hardest bit is the bit where you see the ship flying and a guy walking on the wing. The wing is a crafted item that's been put there by a player on the ship, and then you got the ship flying at 20 meters per second, and then someone walking on that, and you want to see that in a consistent way. By the way, the video you've seen, it's all captured from network play. There is no local network. We can't run the servers on a local network. We need the cloud to run it. So everything you've seen is actually captured from networks. There is no faking. It's actually video we capture. We've removed the bit that don't look great, but it's all captured from the game. So yeah, as I said, the ship can go at quite high speed. This is going to be player customized. They can build more engines so they can go faster, but roughly the ship you've seen will go at 20 meters per second. They also can fly very close to islands, so you're piloting it, you need to see it properly so you can pilot next to other ships. So the ships some of those ships are like 10, 20 meters long. We have a ship that we've tested and built with that's 70 meters long. So you can have quite a lot of player on it, walking around. So the world is huge, physical and continuous, so the ship simulation needs to be handed over to different servers as you move along. As you're moving along, you can't have one server that simulates a 25 by 25 kilometer world. So you need to hand the simulation over from that ship to different servers as you go along. And how do you handle that? Also, all those objects are updated on servers at different refresh rates. The ship might be updated every quarter of a second, maybe every second, depending. The players might be updated more often. So everything has different refresh rate. Nothing is perfectly synchronized, and so things, get out of sync, at least temporarily, and very jerky very quickly. And finally, different part of the systems, like the clients and the servers and the physics simulation server, can have authority on different part of the system. Maybe the client is client authoritative, the player is client authoritative, but the ship is server authoritative, and so that can create a lot of problems in synchronization. So our only saving grace here is that the ships are big, they're heavy, they cannot accelerate too far. The only case where they have a very big acceleration is if they hit something that's even bigger than they are, which is usually an island or another ship. So these are quite rare cases, and usually they're quite violent cases. So if things are jerky and not very smooth at that point, it's all right. Most of the rest of the time, it needs to be smooth. So basically, ships are quite predictable in their movement. So there are solutions for that kind of stuff online. A bit of a few caveats for what I'm going to present. The game is still under development, so a lot of what I'm going to describe might not be good enough to release the game on. It's not guaranteed. I usually don't like talking about things on games that I haven't released yet, but I think we've got to a point where this is comfortable enough that it's worthy, and it's a hard problem enough that it's worth having spreading the information about it. There is something to learn, even if we will need better solutions down the line. And so there's still quite a lot of issue with regard to ship movement in our current implementation, but it's definitely comfortable now. And it comes and goes. It was comfortable, and then things broke, and then it keeps. That's the single thing that breaks the most easily in the game. Okay, so obviously we're talking about player movement on top of a ship, so I want to talk a little bit about our player movement in our game. So very, very quickly, first we tried something that seems like a good idea because it keeps the server authoritative. So I don't know how many of you know the term authoritative in terms of regarding network programming? Well, okay, so I'll have to explain a bit. So when you have a client, Unity client, talking to a server, and you're representing a world, one side, for each object, one side, either the client or the server, need to be what's called authoritative, which is has the authority over that object. It is the true truth of the game. Yeah. So, for example, if you shoot someone in a Counter-Strike, someone has to decide whether you hit or not, and who decides that is the authority. Okay. So, for the player movement, we tried first the server authoritative, which is the server decides where the player actually is. Yeah, that means the client, because it's a bit back in time in terms of movement, because it's waiting for the server to tell it where it is, have to predict. So that's why it's called client-side prediction. Client-side prediction, where the server is authoritative, the player gives instruction to the character, predict where it's going to go, then the server receives those commands and then move the character on the server, and then tells back to the player, yeah, you can move there or you can't. Now, it sounds like a good idea because it puts all the responsibility on the server, but it's a terrible idea in practice. It's really, really hard to do that. You need to have two systems that talk exactly to each other, a system that's predictive on the client, that predicts whatever is going to happen on the server. You get a lot of rubber banding because on the client you look like you pass the corner, but on the server you clip the corner, and so on the client then you teleport it back in time, and so it's really, really hard to do. Also, in our game we've got a lot of different control mechanics. You can be walking, you can be jumping, you can be flying, you can be roping, and every one of those has to have a different prediction set. And it's like you need to write the code twice, one for the actual code and one for prediction on the client. So it's a lot of work. It makes it almost impossible. So pretty quickly, we move to client authority. So basically, the client is authoritative on where the player is. Now that has a lot of drawbacks, but it works and it's comfortable and it's easier to implement. But obviously there's a lot of cheating issues. You can intercept the position sending from the client to the server. Basically the client is telling the server where the player is, so he could cheat by teleporting you and by putting you in different position. Now in this game it doesn't feel like cheating is a big issue yet, but we will have to protect against that at some point. Also simple issues like if you walk on an island that hasn't been loaded yet, you fall through it, even though it's on the server. And then when you load, you're in the middle of the island. So that's a problem. So we need to protect against this kind of stuff too. If the client frame rate is, the player frame rate is pretty bad, then it will only get refreshed at different intervals on the server, and you might see jumpy. So the quality of the client frame rate is a problem. And also what happens if the client crashes, player doesn't really exist on the server. If the client crashes, just freezes in space. If you're on a ship, then what happens? Do you follow the ship or you fall? So there's a bunch of edge cases there. Now, as far as movement is concerned, client authority works for us. So what we did for this is, the problem is when you have a player moving on a platform like a ship, and they are refreshed at different frame rate, you could have a lot of what happens is you see a ship somewhere, and the player that are walking on the ship are actually back in time, and they're floating up in the air. When they look like they should be on the wing, they're actually 5 meters behind the wing. We're moving at 20 meters per second. If we refresh every quarter of a second, that's 5 meter difference depending on where the ship is really. And every time one player moves the ship, everybody does that because they're not simulated at the same speed. And so you get a lot of problem with that. So one of the things we did is we have the player position in absolute world, but also when they're moving on a platform, we register that platform and we make the position relative to that platform. And then we have a value that blends between the two. If you're walking on the ship, you're fully on relative position. When you jump, after a few seconds, you blend off and you start being in the absolute position, which allows you to swing away and blend smoothly between the two. So that works well for us to have a smooth movement on the ship. Now, when you're walking on the ship, all your movement is relative to the ship. So that was the first step of getting the movement working better. Now, the problem is the ship movement is, when you just do the simple implementation, it can be quite erratic. So our first implementation was in a game jam, and we were using Photon, no improbable, and we were just moving the ship in the simplest way you can move the ship. And from that first game jam, it was already, most of the time was spent trying to fix the ship movement and the player movement on the ships, because nothing was moving at the right speed, everything was jerky, it felt really awkward. So we already knew you had a problem, and at that point we just used a simple interpolation from Photon. So basically you get the position update from the network, and you interpolate from the last position to the current position, while on the server the ship's already further ahead. Yeah? So that can be quite a problem. So then we move to improbable, which provides a lot of other systems and physics and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of how it works, it's pretty similar to, we're basically running in the simplest case, we're running the physics simulation on the server, a headless Unity server, and then we're running the client, we're displaying that on the client, and the player moves on the ship that's on the client. Now, as I said before, when you do simple interpolation, it's always delayed. If you drop a packet, if you don't receive the information about the ship position for a while, for some reason, and the ship stops, when you receive the information, it teleports forward, and because all our movement is physical, what makes the player stay on the ship is really friction on the rigid body of the player. Yeah. So there's a capsule and it has friction to the floor. And so if the ship just teleports forward, friction isn't enough to carry you along and you just get dropped off the ship. We have to do that because we use that for slopes. Because the whole game is physical, we kind of need to have the player movement being physical and physically represented. So when you have simple interpolation, you get a lot of jump on the ship. The network connection quality is very important and doesn't work very well. So, I mean, I wanted to talk a bit more about dead reckoning. I'm not sure I'm going to have a lot of time to cover that. So I'll go through it very, very quickly. But I don't know if you know about dead reckoning. Who heard about dead reckoning as a solution to absorb network lag? A few people. Okay, well. So definitely grab the name. I'm going to go through it quickly. It's a solution to help us, and I'm going to cover just that part and jump to the rest. It's basically a solution to predict where the ship is supposed to be now, based on where it was last time you received the information, its speed and maybe its acceleration, and then you predict. You say, if nothing else has affected that object, it would have kept going at that speed and that acceleration, and now it would be here. And you can predict that. It's pretty easy. It's a pretty simple equation to write. Okay? And that tells you, actually, I have been told that the ship is here, but I know that it's further ahead in the future. It's here. Yeah? And also, it allows you to smooth out problem with not receiving the information. You can continue predicting where the ship is going. Yeah? And then when you receive an update, it's usually offset from where you predicted. There's a difference, and then you just compensate for that offset and keep predicting wherever it should be. So for things that are quite predictable, dead reckoning is really, really good. As soon as something is not predictable, like an object hitting another object when you don't have any physical representation on your client, that's harder to predict. So as soon as you have a lot of acceleration changes, it actually is hard to predict. So I'm going to go. That's cool slides, technical slides. I spent a lot of time doing this. I'm going to go run through it. So that was the problem. That's the first one is what you do when you receive the information. You just teleport, then you smooth it over. That's a lot of error, actually even more. Dead reckoning uses the velocity to predict where the ship's going to be. So that kind of does something like that, which you can see can be worse in some cases. Here you got the case where it's actually a lot worse, because it only uses the velocity of the speed of the ship to predict. What we had to do, because of those cases, in our case, we had to also predict based on acceleration. So we also send the acceleration, which is a second derivative for math. It's university, you can talk about math. Second derivative, and they give you a way better prediction. This is just a representation, it's not perfectly accurate, and the error is a lot smaller. Okay, so when you're talking about dead reckoning, if you ever implement dead reckoning, you have to think about three things. The actual data you've received, okay, what you've received from the server of where your object is. The predicted dead reckoning position, as I showed here, that's where you predicted, but you can see it's discontinuous, so it jumps. Hey, there are jumps here. And then the last one is smoothing over things. And then actually, you can also compensate for lag. You can predict, the lag is half a millisecond. I can teleport forward a bit more. Okay, so what do we got? So what we use for Worlds Adrift, we do have a second derivative dead reckoning for the position. We use acceleration. We have a first derivative for the rotation, so we only use the speed for rotation. There's no point going to rotation acceleration. And then we blend between just interpolation when things are moving and shaky and colliding with object, and dead reckoning when we're moving and flying at speed. Okay, blah, blah, blah. That's talking about this. Okay, this is just the first step. I don't know if you know, but Unity doesn't always run at the actual frame rate. If you use Unity for simulation and it has too much to simulate, it will start slowing down. Not just the rendering frame rate, but it will actually get to a point where it will not be capable of simulating 1 second of physics in 1 second. And we have that happens on our servers sometimes. When there's a lot of things happening, we don't have full control over it, then we have what we call time dilation, which is the server slowdown. They do that in EVE Online intentionally. It just happened as a consequence of using Unity. So we get what's happening on the server actually, though it believes that the speed is going at 20 meters per second, on the client it's only going at 10 meters per second, for example. and you need to take that into account in dead reckoning. That makes the equation a bit more complicated, especially when you use acceleration. That makes things a bit harder. You can ask me, or we can talk about it, or you can do the exercise if you're interested. Another problem with this is what happens when you're handing over authority from one server. So we in our game, we have multiple servers simulating different part of the world, bubbles, if you will, and they overlap. And in this overlap, physical object on one server is authoritative, on the other one is just like on the client. It's being simulated. It's being interpolated. And if you, at some point, when you're moving across boundaries of servers, you have to hand over the responsibility, the authority of the ship to the other server. Is that a sign? So when you do that, you have a big jump. If the server that doesn't get given does get given authority is really offset by a lot, you will have a jump on the server or on the client, and this is that can be enough to teleport the ship out of view and kill the player. So we need to do also dead reckoning on the other servers, which can both go at different speed and both have time dilation. So that makes these things even more complicated. Anyway, so I'm going to skip those ones, I'm going to terminate. So one point, I've went through it really quickly. But the thing is, even though that's as simple as problem that's very common in multiplayer games, handling a vehicle that's moving and other player moving on that vehicle is really a hard problem. And when you see the videos of GTA 5 where there's a Zeppelin and then a player walking on top of it and each player shooting at each other and the player on top of the Zeppelin not teleporting every 2 seconds, that's a lot of work that's using some small case in the corner. Now we thought that it's a core element of our game, so we need to be able to do it too. But there's a lot of work that goes into getting this to work. There's a lot of different situations, complex systems, and it's also using multiple timelines. When you think about that problem, it's really difficult to understand where is the server position, the player position, the other player's position, all of that. It makes the problem difficult to understand and to debug. I'm quite good at this kind of stuff, and it's really hard. My head hurts when I do this usually, but you can go through it. So there's also very little space for fudging in our case. If we have any issues, the ship jerks and everybody gets thrown off the ship, and that's really not very acceptable. Things break, easily and fast and dramatically. So it's very important to have good debug tools for this and visual debug tools so you understand the different timelines and what happens. And at the beginning we didn't have those, and it makes our life really hard, and we had to debug these things. We had to build the debug tools. That was like and when we saw what was going on with the debug tools, suddenly we understood what was going on right away. Before we were just looking at code and data. It's impossible to understand what. And the final thing is, if you're looking at this kind of problem, the trivial implementation won't get you very far. You really won't be able to do that with a simple implementation. Anything in multiplayer is really hard. And something that's trivial on single player, where you have a vehicle and just put the player on it and it works, and putting that in multiplayer is really difficult. In general, multiplayer makes things a lot harder. Okay, so that is it. So I went through it very quickly. I wanted to spend a bit more time to explain a bit more. Usually I don't do very technical talk. I do fluffy talks about management and how to talk to coders and how to get the best out of your team. I thought you deserved a bit more technical presentation, add a bit more value to you directly today. But also we're hiring. I need to plug that. We're looking for a lead Unity developer. If you know anybody that would qualify, someone with experience, a Unity experience, we're looking for someone. And all other jobs. There are other jobs on the website. Join us. That's it. So.